Polysecure, Attachment, Trauma, and Consensual Non-Monogamy. Written by Jessica Fern, read by Naomi Kirst-Schultz. This is Chapter 1, Part 2. Insecure Attachment Styles. In this section, I will first present the 3 insecure styles in the typology in which they are commonly presented by other authors. However, some researchers and theorists have moved away from using the traditional 4-type attachment typology, proposing instead that attachment plays out over the 2 dimensions of attachment anxiety and attachment avoidance. This 2-dimensional perspective can be a more precise way of understanding the different expressions of the secure and insecure attachment styles, which I will present after the 3 insecure styles. The avoidant dismissive attachment style. Avoidant attachment in childhood. The avoidant and anxious styles were first observed in children by Mary Ainsworth in 1978 through her strange situation procedure. In these experiments, infants and young children were observed with their primary attachment figure, usually the mother, in a room filled with toys. Each child was at times alone with their parent in the room, then left alone with a stranger while the parent stepped out of the room for several minutes. Of particular interest were how much the child explored the room of toys, how much anxiety the child felt when left alone with the stranger, and how the child responded to first being separated and then reunited with their parent. The child's response to separation and reunion became the primary way of assessing secure and insecure attachment. Children with a secure attachment were observed as comfortable exploring the room of toys while their parents were present, at ease interacting with strangers when parents were present, and then expressing healthy attachment distress when their parents left the room, followed by relief and comfort when their parents returned. The children who were classified with the avoidant attachment pattern were observed as being distant from their caretakers, showing little to no distress upon separation, expressing little interest in the parents upon reunion, and even showing little preference for being with their parents versus the stranger. These children were less likely to explore the room of toys, and often preferred to play by themselves. Interestingly, the seemingly unaffected demeanor of those children who were physically and emotionally distant from their caretakers did not reflect their internal state. Even though these children appeared quote-unquote fine on the outside, they were actually experiencing internal signs of elevated heart rate and physiological stress. A child who had parents who were mostly unavailable, neglectful, or absent adapted to their attachment environment by taking on a more avoidant style. Parenting that is cold, distant, critical, or highly focused on achievement or appearance can create an environment where the child learns that they are better off relying on themselves. When a child does not get enough of the positive attachment responses that they need, or that they are outright rejected or criticized for having needs, they will adapt by shutting down and deactivating their attachment longings. A child in this scenario learns that, in order to survive, they need to inhibit their attachment bids for proximity or protection in order to prevent the pain and confusion of neglect or rejection. In this situation, a child often learns to subsist on emotional crumbs, assuming that the best way to get their needs met by their parent is to act as if they don't have any. In adulthood, having a deactivated attachment system includes not only minimizing one's own bids for care and attention, but also having a diminished ability to pick up on and register attachment cues from others. Some of the different factors that can contribute to a child adopting an avoidant attachment style are isolation, through too much time alone or not enough face-to-face time with parents. The absence of physical or emotional presence from caretakers. Too much emphasis on task-based presence. That is, where caregivers are only present when they are trying to educate or teach something to their child that is practical, academic, or skills-based. Too little touch and affection, or what Diane Poole Heller calls skin hunger. Emotional neglect, where emotional nourishment is low or absent and parents are unable to effectively read the child's signals. Such parents might respond in insensitive ways or be completely unresponsive to the child's emotional states and needs. Expressive dissonance, which is when someone's facial or verbal expressions are mismatched with their emotional states. Someone might be laughing when they are angry or smiling when they are actually upset, which can be confusing to children, or anyone for that matter. Since children are learning how to identify and express their own emotional states through the modeling of the adults around them, a parent with expressive dissonance can create challenges in their child's ability to understand others' feelings and to express themselves in ways that are socially appropriate and authentic. Disrupted engagement with caretakers due to illnesses or other factors that interfere with either the child or the parent participating in bonding attachment behaviors. See the nested attachment model in Chapter 3. Rejection from parents that might be ongoing, subtle, or even outright abandonment of the child and parental responsibilities. Parents who are overly strict and controlling. Or parents who might have the best intentions but have a child who is so different from them that they are unable to understand or connect with that child in attuned ways. Dismissive attachment as an adult. In adulthood, the childhood avoidant style is referred to as dismissive. A person who is functioning from a dismissive style will tend to keep people at arm's length. Usually priding themselves on not needing anyone, people with this style will tend to take on an overly self-reliant outlook, valuing their hyper-independence and often seeing others as weak, needy, or too dependent. Although they may present as having high self-esteem, people functioning from a dismissive attachment style often project unwanted traits onto others and inflate their sense of self to cover a relatively negative self-image. People with this attachment style have reported lower levels of relationship satisfaction, trust, and commitment, as well as having more negative views about sex and lower levels of sexual satisfaction when married. A person with a dismissive attachment style likely didn't get what they needed early in life from their primary caretakers, so they learned to get by and survive by needing little to nothing from others. When someone grows up in a home with minimal or no emotional nourishment, it makes sense that they would de-emphasize the value and importance of relationships, and that they find it extremely difficult to be vulnerable and open with others. Oftentimes, their own painful emotions or experiences are placed below the radar of their emotional awareness in order to avoid the discomfort of feeling pain. This, in turn, creates a disconnection from their own feelings and needs. Living with a sense of chronic disconnection from themselves, others, and the world, they might at times experience the longing to be close, but then feel at a total loss as to how to bridge the gap between their isolation and others, missing opportunities to receive support from their partners or to provide care to their loved ones. People in this attachment style do want relationships. They will enter into relationships, even long-term relationships, but may struggle with their ability to reflect on their own internal experience, as well as sensitively respond to the signals of their partners. They usually find it difficult to tolerate emotions related to intimacy, conflict, and different forms of emotional intensity. When someone who is functioning in this style either feels vulnerable or perceives vulnerability in their partner, they will distance themselves to avoid discomfort. Signs of potential rejection or criticism from others will also create a quick withdrawal. People with the dismissive attachment style will also tend to be highly linear and logical, showing many forms of competence and ability in the practical or professional realms of life. This overdevelopment of the logical brain can also create challenges with certain aspects of autobiographical memory. People with a dismissive attachment style might have little memory for childhood experiences, as well as simplistic narratives about their parents and childhood being, quote-unquote, just fine. In my therapy practice, I often notice that people who are relating from the dismissive style initially describe their parents or current romantic relationships as being great, even ideal, but just a few minutes of deeper questioning into their actual childhood experiences or current relational patterns reveals that things aren't actually so perfect. This occurs because the deactivation of their attachment system has made it difficult for them to access and consistently stay in touch with their true feelings. For many, contacting and admitting one's actual feelings might be perceived as a threat to their current relationship or to the status quo of their family of origin. Part of this deactivating and distancing adaptation is the dissociation from lived experience. When someone with a dismissive style starts to work on healing their insecure attachment, they must begin by no longer dismissing and distancing from themselves. This requires that they no longer deny their desires and needs, allowing the wants and longings for connection that have for so long been forbidden. When someone functioning from a dismissive style starts to allow their attachment system to come back online, it can initially be a very tender, raw, and even overwhelming process. The skills that come with being able to identify your own feelings are part of a developmental process that takes time. The process of allowing feelings as they arise, learning how to self-soothe, and establishing an inner trust that experiencing feelings is safe is something that cannot be rushed. For the dismissive style, the journey from insecure to secure attachment is one of returning to the body through bringing feelings and sensations back to life and learning how to be with oneself in this process. Once this is established, the risk of then leaning into others, revealing one's internal world and dismantling the self-reliant exoskeleton through asking for help and care from others can begin. Statements that someone with a dismissive attachment style might make. My autonomy, independence, and self-sufficiency are very important to me. I am generally comfortable without close relationships and do well on my own. I want to be in relationships and have some closeness with people, but I can only tolerate closeness to a limit, and then I need space. I prefer not to share my feelings or show a partner how I feel deep down. I frequently don't know what I'm feeling or needing, or I can miss cues from others about what they are feeling or needing. I feel uncomfortable relying on partners and having partners depend or rely on me. I either struggle with making relationship commitments, or if I do commit, I may secretly have one foot out the door, or, at the least, have the back door unlocked. I am very sensitive to any signs that my partner is trying to control me or interfere with my freedom in any way, and I don't like the word sensitive. I see myself or others as weak for having needs or wanting comfort, help, or reassurance. During disagreements or in conflict, I tend to withdraw, shut down, shut out, or stonewall. I do well with the transition from being together with people to then being alone again. But once I've been alone for a while, I can be slow to warm up to others, or struggle with the transition from being alone to entering back into connection with someone. The anxious, preoccupied attachment style. Anxious attachment in childhood. In Ainsworth's strange situation procedure, children who were classified as being anxiously attached were reluctant to play with the toys in the room even when their parent was present. They showed signs of distress and clinginess even before their parent left the room and struggled to settle down upon reunion with their caregiver. For these children, the attachment system was hyperactivated in comparison to the deactivating of the attachment system that the avoidant style employs. Hyperactivating the attachment system ramps up the desire for a caretaker, amplifying the child's attachment bids as a way to capture a parent's attention. Parents who are loving but inconsistent can encourage the adaptation of the anxious style. Sometimes the parent is here and available, attuned and responsive, but then other times they are emotionally unavailable, misattuned, or even intrusive, leaving the child confused and uncertain as to whether their parent is going to comfort them, ignore them, reward them, or punish them for the very same behavior. This unpredictability can be very dysregulating for a child who is trying to stabilize a bond with their caregiver. So, in an attempt to cope, they then learn that hyperactivating their attachment system through getting louder or needier achieves the attention they need. In this scenario, the child can become dependent on their hyperactivating strategy in order to survive, fearing that if they let their attachment system settle and rest, then their needs will never be met. This, in turn, can lead to a chronically activated attachment system that exaggerates threats of potential abandonment which may or may not actually be there. Some factors that can contribute to a child adopting an ancient, insecure attachment style are parents who are unable to consistently co-regulate with their child, which leaves the child dependent on others to regulate their emotions, again and again turning outward to make sense of their inner feelings and unable to emotionally regulate on their own. Over-involving the child in the parent's state of mind, where the parent's emotions or state of mind is more central to the parent-child interaction than the child's. In this case, the child might be asked, whether explicitly or implicitly, to be responsible for meeting the parent's needs, making the parent feel better, or supplying the parent with meaning and purpose. This is often due to a parent's own level of anxiety, stress, or unresolved trauma, or their own anxious attachment history. When the state of mind of the parent is the centerpiece of interactions, the child is left to constantly monitor and be concerned about their parent's state of well-being, which can encourage a role reversal in which the child is acting more like the parent in the relationship. As a child, being responsible for a parent's well-being is a misplaced, confusing, and overwhelming responsibility. Overstimulation. We live in an increasingly stimulating world with fewer spaces to rest, physically and mentally, between interactions with people, with technology, with billboards, ads, and the like. Our nervous systems need breaks from such stimulation in order to develop properly, and parents can impede this process when they force constant contact and require attention or presence from a child that might be beyond their developmental capacity, hovering over the child, interjecting themselves when the child is calmly playing independently or enjoying time with others, or even pushing physical boundaries through tickling or affection that is unwanted by the child in that particular moment. Or parents who discourage autonomy. Some parents discourage their child's agency and autonomy through comments or suggestions that insinuate, whether subtly or overtly, that the child is incapable, less than, or not enough in some way. Even well-intentioned parents can question their children's actions and decisions in ways that are shaming instead of encouraging. Some parents who are struggling with their own anxiety can easily get overwhelmed by children who want to explore and discourage or overprotect the child in ways that undermine their interests or abilities. Preoccupied attachment as an adult. When used to characterize an adult, anxious attachment is called preoccupied. People with this attachment style demonstrate an intense focus and heightened concern about the level of closeness in their relationships. A defining factor of the preoccupied style is how the person's hyperactivated attachment strategy not only amplifies their attachment bids, but also intensifies their focus on their partners. Because of this, they may end up constantly monitoring their partner's level of availability, interest, and responsiveness. The partner of someone with a preoccupied attachment style may then feel like this constant tracking of relational misattunements and mistakes is controlling of them. But for the person with a preoccupied attachment style, this behavior is less an attempt to overtly control their partner than it is a symptom of their attachment system being overly sensitive to even the slightest sign they might be left. From their perspective, they're not trying to control their partner, they're just grasping for a relationship they're afraid is slipping out of their hands. Hyperfocus, on the other, can lead to a disconnection or loss of self through over-functioning and over-adapting in the relationship in an attempt to maintain and preserve the connection. Frequently consumed by fears of abandonment, people functioning out of a preoccupied style will easily give up their own needs or sense of self, yielding to the needs or identity of their partner in order to ensure proximity and relationship security. Due to their history of unpredictable and inconsistent love, they may have considerable challenges with trusting that their partners truly love them. They may frequently fall into self-critical and self-doubting loops, questioning if they are truly worthy enough to receive their partner's love. They often have a hard time fully taking in the love they so desperately want, even when it is given. People functioning from this style tend to jump into relationships or bond very quickly with people. Often idealizing their partners, they may confuse anxiety and intensity for being in love, hearing and seeing only what they want to see, and missing potential red flags. They may not allow enough time to get to know someone beyond the honeymoon phase in order to assess if this person and the relationship are truly a good fit. A person with a preoccupied style can be uncomfortable, even terrified of being alone. They often promote their own dependency on their partners, or they might promote their partner's dependency on them in a way that discourages doing things separately from each other. Engaging in compulsive caretaking can also become a way to prevent the discomfort of feeling lonely and enhance the perceived security of not being abandoned. Even though people with this style tend to sacrifice themselves for the relationship, the ways in which they are preoccupied and compulsively give care are not necessarily attuned. In such cases, the caregiving is more of a strategy to keep a person close than an actual response to what their partner genuinely needs. If someone with this attachment style perceives even the slightest possibility that their partner is disconnected or disinterested, they can become demanding, possessive, or needy for approval, reassurance, connection, contact, and greater emotional or sexual intensity. From their partner's perspective, the needs of the person with the preoccupied attachment style may seem insatiable. The partner may feel they can never do enough, which can in turn create the very pulling away or even breaking up that the person with the preoccupied style is so desperate to avoid. Compared to people with a more secure attachment style, people with a preoccupied style report increased jealousy and relationship conflict, as well as feelings of ambivalence about their sex life, since they are less likely to use consistent contraception and more likely to engage in sex they don't fully want. Similar to people with a dismissive attachment adaptation, people with the preoccupied adaptation also have difficulty identifying and describing their own emotions. Initially, this may seem counterintuitive since the preoccupied person is much more emotionally focused, self-disclosing, and heightened in both their emotional experience and expression in comparison to someone with a dismissive style, who typically has less access to their feelings. But it makes sense if you look a little closer. Someone with a preoccupied style has more awareness of both their feelings and their partner's feelings, but they still struggle with differentiating and communicating their feelings, and with managing their emotional responses in healthy ways. Also, although they're aware of their partner's feelings, they're not necessarily reading those feelings accurately. People with this attachment style might be very precise in detecting even the slightest change in their partner's mood or state, but they're more likely to assume that the shifts are personal to them and that they are negative, when neither may be true. Part 3 covers ways to heal the different attachment styles and provides a more in-depth look at self-soothing. It also explains a model called HEARTS, which describes secure functioning in ways that can be applied to healing your own attachment challenges. For now, I'll just say that someone with a preoccupied style must first come back to themselves. I will often guide clients to tune into where their sense of self is. Is it within their own body or out there in someone else's body? If it is with someone else, we can then focus on calling themselves back to establish a sense of inner authority and self-trust. Statements that someone with a preoccupied attachment style might make. I am comfortable with connection and usually crave it more than my partners do. I am very attuned to others and can detect subtle shifts in their emotional or mental states. I often worry about being abandoned, rejected, or not valued enough. I tend to over-focus on my partners and under-focus on myself. When I am going through something, I tend to reach out and turn towards others to make sense of what I'm experiencing, or to make myself feel better. I need a lot of reassurance that I am loved or desired by a partner. However, when my partners give me reassurance or show their desire for me, it either doesn't register for me, or I have trouble receiving and believing it. I tend to commit to relationships and get attached very quickly. I get frustrated or hurt if a partner is not available when I need them. I get resentful or take it personally when a partner spends time away from me. I do well with the transition from being alone to being together with partners, but I struggle when going from being together to being alone again. I tend to hold on to resentments and have trouble letting go of old wounds. The disorganized, fearful, avoidant attachment type. Disorganized attachment in childhood. The final insecure style was not initially classified in Mary Ainsworth's original studies, but was named later by Main and Solomon. Ainsworth observed that a percentage of the children in her strange situation procedure did not neatly fit into one of the 3 categories of secure, anxious, and avoidant. Some children displayed confusing, even chaotic behaviors, such as running towards their behavior and then immediately away from them, freezing up, hitting their parent for no apparent reason, rolling or throwing themselves on the floor, and more. Main and Solomon later reassessed these findings and furthered our understanding of the attachment styles by adding the 4th classification of disorganized. Children with a disorganized attachment style have an attachment system that seems to be hyperactivated and deactivated at the same time. They don't display a consistent organized attachment strategy in the same way that children with a secure, anxious, or avoidant style do. Instead, they seem to lack a coherent organization of which strategy to employ, often vacillating between the anxious and avoidant insecure attachment styles. The disorganized attachment style is most commonly associated with trauma, and it typically arises when a child experiences their attachment figure as scary, threatening, or dangerous. When we are afraid, our attachment system gets activated to seek proximity to and comfort from our attachment figure. But what happens when our attachment figure is the person causing the threat? This puts the child in a paradoxical situation where their caretaker, who is supposed to be the source of their comfort and the solution to their fears, is actually the source of their fear instead. Diane Poole Heller refers to this conflicting experience as having one foot on the gas and one foot on the brake. The child's attachment system wants to move towards their attachment figure, while the protective defense mechanism of flight, fight, freeze, appease wants to move away from the attachment figure, and the two systems are co-activated. The predominant factor leading to this style in childhood is having parents who are suffering from their own unresolved trauma or losses. When a parent has a history of unresolved trauma, they are more easily overwhelmed by life's demands and emotionally flooded by their child's emotional states. Unable to regulate their own emotions, parents with their own history of unhealed trauma, neglect, or abuse might then act out, lash out, or completely tune out in ways that are scary to the child. Whether that parent is being terrifyingly over-responsive or frighteningly under-responsive, the child learns that they are not safe with the very person who's supposed to protect them. Research has shown that approximately 20 to 40% of the general population has some degree of a disorganized attachment style, and approximately 80% of children who have experienced abuse develop a disorganized attachment style to one or both of their parents. Additional factors that can lead to a disorganized attachment style include parents who are on an emotional roller coaster, parents who have drastic, unpredictable fluctuations in their moods, actions, or mental states can be extremely confusing for the child, leaving them uncertain whether to approach or withdraw. One of my clients described how her stepmother's emotionally erratic behavior was still lingering in her own nervous system decades later. At family holidays, her stepmother would dote on her 1 minute, showering her with gifts and praise, and then minutes later would erupt in a yelling fury, shaming her for not paying enough attention to her younger stepbrother. This client recalled how she wasn't the only one who fell into a freeze response when her stepmother had these outbursts. All of the adults in the house did, including her father. They would freeze up, unsure about how to handle the situation. This left her additionally abandoned by the other adults around her who could have stepped in to mitigate the situation in some way that was responsive and protective for her at a crucial time. Parents who are contradictory in their communication, indirect signals or direct expressions that tell the child to come close but then go away, that they are loved but then unworthy of love, or that they should succeed but are a failure, can all be perplexing to a child. Similarly, unrealistic expectations, catch-22s, being punished or shamed for not doing something that they were never shown how to do, being asked to solve problems that are unsolvable, or being expected to do tasks beyond their developmental capacity can all lead to a level of disorientation where the child is left frozen and unclear whether to move up or down, left or right. They are damned if they do, damned if they don't. Family chaos. Factors such as illness, financial stress, job insecurity, parents who are imprisoned or handling addictions, and even a culture of overachieving in which every minute of a child's life is scheduled with extracurricular activities can all create a home of chaos. It is difficult to feel safe and secure when the home that we live in and the people that we rely on are unstable, unpredictable, or even erratic. Well-intentioned parents who push their child into more and more enriching activities can cause children to feel destabilized from the lack of rest, downtime, and free playtime that is needed to feel settled and soothed in the nervous system. In such cases, attachment figures may not be engaging in direct mistreatment of their child, but the surrounding environment or some of the parents' behaviors can create fear and chaos for the child, disrupting their ability to feel safe and secure. The child may be a highly sensitive person or have a challenging health condition. While disorganized attachment is often associated with parental abuse and neglect, this isn't always the case. Certain traits or experiences specific to the child can also prompt a disorganized experience. Approximately 15 to 20% of the population has a nervous system wired to be more sensitive. These people are more attuned to the subtleties of their environment and process that information much more deeply compared to others without the trait. While being more observant might be a survival advantage, it can also be overwhelming. Someone who is constantly aware of the subtleties of the environment and of the people around them can quickly experience sensory overload. My clients who consider themselves to be highly sensitive persons often report experiencing a certain type of disorganized attachment because the world itself is too much. Due to their increased sensitivity, even normal everyday events can feel too intense, too chaotic, or too stimulating, leaving little respite to feel settled, safe, and secure. In relationships, HSPs are often unclear as to whether what they are feeling has its origin in themselves or if their partner's feelings are creating that 1 foot on the gas, 1 foot on the brake experience in their nervous system. They want to be close to people, but being close can be a sensory assault that is confusing or that dysregulates them for days. Similarly, I see people with certain illnesses who suffer with a disorganized attachment, not because of their parental experiences, but because of the world and the body they find themselves in. Imagine what it's like to eat a certain food that may be innocuous for most people, but can spiral you into debilitating physical and mental symptoms for days. Or imagine what it would be like to be invited to a friend's house for their birthday, which should be celebratory, but is actually terrifying to you because you don't know if you are going to be exposed to mold, but is actually terrifying to you because you don't know if you're going to be exposed to mold that can set off neurological symptoms that will interfere with your ability to think, walk, or talk. Or imagine what it would be like for someone with chemical sensitivities who can't just jump into a taxi, just stay in a hotel, or even at times walk into a grocery store without experiencing an olfactory punch that can leave them less than functional for days. In such cases, the world itself isn't safe, and our bodies are not safe in the world. When autoimmunity is at play, someone will experience a paradoxical situation where the immune system that is supposed to be protecting them is actually harming them, and the body that is the vehicle for life is the very thing taking it away. Fearful avoidant attachment as an adult. In adulthood, the disorganized attachment style is referred to as fearful avoidant. People with this style of attachment experience a clashing fear of either being too close or too far away from their partners. People with this insecure attachment style have the characteristics of both the dismissive and preoccupied styles. Their desire for closeness and their longing for connection are active, but because they have precious experiences of the ones they loved or depended on hurting them, they tend to feel uncomfortable relying on others or are even paralyzed by the fear that speaking their feelings and needs could be dangerous and make things worse. They might request attention from a partner, but then withdraw when connection is offered, or in more extreme manifestations, they might demand attention or affection and then attack or criticize their partner when what they want is given. People with this style are easily overwhelmed by their feelings or subject to what I call emotional flare-ups, where their intense emotional states can take over, disrupting their ability to function and, at times, taking others down with them. Due to their history of trauma, their sense of self and others have been impaired. When trauma occurs, there is a rupture with the foundational relationship a person has with their self. This severed internal relationship with the self needs to be restored so that the person can go on to trust and value themselves as well as begin to trust others again. When this type of healing has yet to occur, people functioning from the fearful avoidant attachment style will tend to see themselves as broken and unworthy and will expect that others are untrustworthy or will only hurt them in the end. In more extreme cases, this attachment style is associated with high relationship turmoil, dissatisfaction and toxicity, self-destructive behaviors, relationship abuse, mental illness, and addiction. Diane Poole Heller makes two important distinctions in regard to this attachment style. The first is that the expression of this style can either look more dismissive and withdrawing, or more anxious, clingy, and pursuing. Heller refers to these two variations as either being more disorganized avoidant or disorganized anxious. In my own practice, I make a distinction between the internal fearful avoidant and the external fearful avoidant. In the category of internal fearful avoidant, we find people who, when under stress or threat, are triggered into higher anxiety and have the internal disorganized experience of wanting connection and wanting to move closer to someone, yet simultaneously feeling an inner pull back, believing the connection to be unsafe. However, such people do not act this dynamic out in ways that are destructive to themselves or others. The experience is more internally disruptive rather than externally damaging. Other people express the experience of having one foot on the gas and the other on the brake in a relationship in a much more external and reactive way. These people react externally in ways that are confusing, contradictory, or harmful. The distinction between internal and external, fearful avoidant, might be a difference in degree or severity within this attachment style, or it might also be two different stages in healing. A person with a fearful avoidant attachment style who has been engaging in healing work that is moving them towards more secure functioning may initially develop less external reactivity while still experiencing an inner push-pull dynamic. The process of resolving their trauma may have enabled them to now choose differently with how they externally respond. The second important distinction that Heller makes is that we can have a chronically disorganized style that functions as a primary attachment style or more of a situational disorganized style. In the situational kind, someone might be more consistently secure, dismissive, or preoccupied in their attachment style, but in certain situations or under the influence of certain triggers, they get activated into a temporary, disorganized state. Once the stressor or situation resolves, they then return to their other, more dominant style. Since people with the fearful avoidant style experience both attachment anxiety and attachment avoidance, see which of the above statements for the dismissive and preoccupied styles also describe your experience. Some statements that someone with a fearful avoidant style might make are: I often don't feel safe or fully trusting in relationships, even if my partner acts in safe and trustworthy ways. I frequently get triggered by things that seem to come out of nowhere. I genuinely want intimacy and closeness, but I can experience episodes of fearful overwhelm when intimacy with a partner increases. When in conflict, I can vacillate from being overwhelmed or aggressive to being dismissive and numb. I can vacillate between different types of chaos or rigidity. When in distress, I have acted in ways that have been harmful to myself or my partners. I often expect that the worst will happen in a relationship, even when things are going well. I have elaborate negative fantasies about what will go wrong or how my partner will inevitably hurt me beyond repair, even if things are going mostly well. Being in a relationship can cause me to become dysregulated, dissociative, or confused. There are times when I look fine on the outside, but I am actually a complete tsunami on the inside. I frequently experience the conflicting internal drives of wanting to be close and share myself, but fearing that closeness or vulnerability will be dangerous or cause the relationship to end. An important takeaway from this overview of attachment theory is the importance of securely attaching to others who will care for us. This is our first survival strategy because without the loving and attentive presence from others, we would die. Accordingly, emotional attunement and connection are wired into us as basic human needs that persist through life. Depending on the environment and circumstance that we were born into and how well our parents were able to meet our attachment needs, some conditions our parents had control of and others they did not, we will either develop a secure attachment style where we feel safe to be with our caretakers and explore the world beyond them, or we will develop an insecure attachment style. Insecure attachment can take the form of overly pulling into ourselves to avoid and withdraw, overly turning outward to others to grasp and procure, or vacillating between the two. These insecure attachment styles are secondary survival strategies that make sense based on what we went through as a child and will continue to impact how we attach and bond in our adult romantic relationships. Here, I invite you to reflect on your own personal attachment history, what style or styles you experienced with your different attachment figures, and how this relates to the attachment behaviors you have exhibited in your adult romantic relationships. This has been Polysecure, Attachment, Trauma, and Consensual Non-Monogamy. Chapter 1, An Overview of Attachment Theory, Part 2. Read by Naomi Kirst-Schultz. Thanks for listening along.